Be strong.
The scene changes to an Einrogard employee riding a horse-drawn cart to bring each box of goods. They took turns using their hands to carry each heavy box down. Einrogard employees must always endure strict compliance with 3 rules. First, they are not allowed to talk about what they see. Next, they are not allowed to start a conversation. And finally, most importantly, they are absolutely not allowed to pry even when there is a target name, monk. And the students appeared on the opposite side of the entrance. They also didn't say a word. Lihan and Radford did not dare to say anything, they only dared to whisper to each other. Lihan thought it was very strange that they were intentionally ignoring both of them, and Radford thought they were just trying to show that they were not yet. See you guys. Lihan put his hand on his chin and stroked it, thinking, so he could avoid unnecessary suspicious things. Suddenly Lihan walked up to the person carrying goods for Einrogard. He went to ask him. Lihan was friendly, using his foreign minister skills. He asked him if he could ride in a carriage. Unexpectedly, the man happily smiled and agreed, asking him to wait inside for them. Finished working. The wheels rolled loudly on the dirt road. The two of them were now in the car. Radford was nervous and restless, and Lihan crossed his arms to reassure himself that nothing had happened so far. It's just that the way Radford evaluated Lihan was a bit too aggressive. He kept praising him for running out of sauce. Lihan immediately looked outside, feeling a bit strange, because the two drivers didn't say a word. Thinking back, it makes sense, because this world is not easy either. Einrogard is a symbol of kingship and magic, so it has many enemies. Not only are there political forces, but because valuable goods pass through and go out from here, the risk from that is definitely very high. He guessed that this tension was probably a side effect, but thinking about it again, not stopping the newcomer from leaving was still too unreasonable. The car was continuing to go when it suddenly stopped in a forest. Lihan looked out and wanted to ask why the two men stopped the car. His words were stuck in his throat. Lihan's eyes widened, panicked and unable to believe the scene before him. Image of a woman with long black hair standing nearby. The silhouette of a familiar woman, her hair curled into braids. Professor, so it's a professor. Lihan thought to himself that he had been caught, but it didn't look like it. Radford next to him was trembling, pointing at the professor. There was a professor out there. Lihan put his finger to his mouth to signal him to be quiet. Lihan doesn't think she knows they're here. He told Radford to quietly observe the situation first. He nodded in agreement. Lihan turned in the other direction. He didn't know why she came here. In the professor's hand there was a bundle of cloth. She opened it. It turned out that there were imperial officials coming. The principal told her to give this to them. The professor sighed, complaining that she always had to hand over these antiques. She looked at the students. Everyone was trembling. Garcia Kim thought to herself, even though I just smiled, they always looked scared. Suddenly, the blue-haired rabbit-eared student woke up, his eyes wide open. He picked up the sword. He turned to the person next to him and shouted loudly to take the weapon. Professor Kim was confused. Why are you holding a weapon just because I'm laughing? Fleeing Vietnam, he shouted because he heard the warning sound from the Vanguard team. This was also an emergency situation. Professor Kim was a bit startled. Outside, there was a man shouting loudly, "This is the final warning, tell your identities immediately." The two people were tightly packed. They raised their hands in surrender, trying to explain that they were just businessmen visiting. The white-bearded man smirked and asked the merchant. He shouted loudly, obviously lying, "Do you think we don't know you guys hide weapons behind your back?" The other guy grabbed the hem of his shirt and lifted it up. He picked up his weapon and said contemptuously, "Even the staff in the academy are extraordinary. Are you soldiers or mercenaries?" The white-bearded guy shouted loudly at those standing behind to get into formation. Everyone raised their crossbows. The commanding shout to fire. The businessman did not tremble and was still very calm. He held 2 knives and sickles in his hands. "How stupid, do you think we came here without preparing anything?" The people on the other side were scared. They weren't ordinary thieves. They shouted loudly asking who you were. He is still very calm. Shout out loud, now you're helping the magicians bring this empire to the brink of collapse. The merchant asked them to put down their weapons and surrender. Together we will save this empire from destruction. The guy with brown hair and beard was scared. Oh my god, my ancestors. It turned out that they were anti-magic, those who rejected magic and brought chaos. The merchant holding the weapon said I had finished warning him. They rushed forward and shouted, "I will execute you with glory." A yellow stick appeared. Divine level wall. Suddenly, the anti-magic group fell backwards. It turned out to be a professor, an extremely strong professor indeed. Professor Garcia holds a magic shield to block. She still felt that the situation was still not very good. Our opponents are people from the Dusk and Dawn team. They have killed many magicians. It is very difficult for anyone to fight them for long, unless they are a war mage. The only thing I can do now is, the professor thought. Professor Garcia Kim held the magic shield to warn the rest. She thought she should just try to hold out as long as possible. Until the principal arrived, the anti-magic group looked at each other and made other plans. Suddenly, they held up a magic ball. Glowing magic ball. They slowly picked it up. The green light gradually brightened. Professor Garcia Kim, holding the magic shield, was also startled. She felt her mana disappearing. The students were scared and asked what was wrong. She worriedly said that magic was not omnipotent. Because there are many ways to destroy magic, it's rare to see an artifact that can absorb mana on such a large scale. What the hell is that? A sphere that absorbs light. Maybe it's an artifact. Luxurious, rare objects, gold, silver and jewels appeared. You're saying that it's an extremely rare treasure that comes from ruins and dungeons. Why do these people have it? Professor Kim doesn't know what to do. It absorbs any mana I can gather. I can't maintain the magic anymore. Suddenly, something appeared behind Professor Garcia. You are anti-magic, he shouted loudly. Evil magician, it is time for you to receive punishment. She turned around in surprise. When did he get there? A guy with white hair covering his face. It jumped and pounced on Garcia. Suddenly, that guy let out a cry. Everyone turned to look. What just happened? Did he suddenly trip over the grass? Why is someone's voice ringing out around here? It's nothing, it's Li Han. He holds a long stick in his hand, relieved to have arrived on time. 10 minutes ago, the anti-magic group came to him. Li Han was depressed. This isn't the principal's trap, right? Radford hid behind him in fear. What should we do? Radford, hide yourself quickly. Li Han whispered something in Radford's ear. Radford asked again, what about you? Li Han replied, I have my plan, don't worry. Li Han left. He thought the Dusk and Dawn team was an anti-magic organization. If they didn't stop them now, they would create even bigger problems in the future. Li Han used magic to hide in the dark and pass through the carriages. At Professor Garcia Kim's place, there is no one around. Suddenly, Li Han appeared brightly, startling the professor. Why are you here? She tried to find out where he was. Li Han told the professor to calm down. And please give me instructions. She took the magic shield. Okay, now is not the time to talk. Everyone hold on to their weapons, because we have requested reinforcements from the school. They will be here soon. Until then, Li Han, I need you. Each crossbow shot out. She yelled at everyone to hide and just not get hurt. The anti-magic group flew as fast as an arrow. Li Han was startled by the enemy's speed. All of them were assassins. He asked the professor why he didn't use magic. She replied, because my mana was absorbed by the ancient ruins. Wait a minute. She turned to Li Han. How could he still maintain his invisibility? Wait, think again. She clapped her hands. It was because my mana was as endless as the ocean. She told Li Han to give her a little mana. He agreed and then placed his hand on her hand. Both hands clasped each other tightly. Professor Garcia picked up the magic shield. A stream of magic lit up and curled up. He exclaimed, what a powerful magic. The enemies were surprised by something giant appearing. That light flew away. It's rushing this way, get out of the way. It turned out that it was rushing towards the ball. The two things touched each other and then collided strongly. The sound of the explosion was deafening. The crimson light blends with the bright yellow color. Garcia Kim is proud. I did it, my mana is coming back. She will take care of the other places. She picked up her magic shield and cast a spell. Loi Lang is real, a bear appeared. The anti-magic group rushed together and ran away. Li Han was surprised. He thought that even though it was dim, it seemed like his mana was still flowing somewhere else. The previously cracked sphere suddenly became active. Li Han looked towards it, surprised. He told the professor that the relic was still active. Suddenly the enemies pounced on her, everyone attacked together, quickly making the magician unable to attack. Garcia Kim gritted his damn teeth. They approached while I was attacking the relic. Li Han grabbed his wand. He swung straight at the enemy. Immediately, the enemy fell. His teammates wondered if he had fallen even though there was nothing around. One of them reassured everyone to calm down. There was definitely someone around here using invisibility magic. Then the other guy betrayed Li Han invisibly, making him unable to react in time. He wondered how they could react so quickly to an enemy they couldn't see. Furthermore, the magical energy emitted from that guy was different from the rest. Li Han cannot let him approach the professor. He grabbed his hood. Then Li Han appeared in the light. The enemy sneered, not expecting that the guy who did these clever tricks was just a kid. We will teach you a lesson for daring to get in someone else's way. Li Han did not stand still. He despised them. Do you think I am a fool? He ran over. Li Han shouted loudly, why should I fight with you guys? It turned out that Li Han was walking towards the relic. The enemies were shouting to capture him and not let him get the relic. He found it too dangerous to fight them head-on, so he hid in the shadows. The leader said I would deal with him. You guys go over there and attack that magician. Li Han reassured himself to stay calm and do things carefully. He took out a ball from his shirt. He threw them out and disappeared. The ball flew into the face of one of the enemies. Be careful, he uses invisible weapons. The enemies are alert. He doesn't have fighting skills. Don't let your guard down just because he's a brat. He ran over. He felt this was completely different from his classes. It felt like his brain was on fire. But you have to concentrate. If you relax even a little, your life will be in danger. I'll shoot out iron balls, retrieve them, and repeat. He kept saying in his head, shoot the iron balls, retrieve them, and then repeat, shoot the iron balls, retrieve them. Suddenly, something liquid flowed down on the ground. Li Han's nose dripped something. Li Han raised his hand. It flowed down his hand. Li Han is trying to escape from two strangers who are chasing right behind him. He still couldn't recover from the shock of having a nosebleed. He was worried if he had run out of mana. But then Li Han realized it wasn't because he was still invisible. He turned to look at the stranger behind him and thought he was too focused. After that, Li Han continued to run away, but he also realized that this could not continue any longer. Suddenly, the bright yellow ball that was the ancient artifact was activated in midair. Li Han ran and threw more iron balls to limit their movement. The stranger noticed that the ball had flown in front of him. He also gradually noticed the presence of Li Han running away in front of him. That stranger didn't hesitate and cut the ball he launched in half. Suddenly he felt a faint scent appear in front of him. He realized that this was the scent of Li Han's blood, so he ordered his accomplices to follow the scent of blood to the artifact. They obeyed and chased after the scent of Li Han's blood, towards the ancient artifact, and he looked in that direction and silently exclaimed how dangerous it was. Li Han picked up a sword from the ground. While they were still looking around looking for Li Han, he had to attack them first. Li Han's downward slash seriously injured one of them. The stranger with two curls of hair witnessed his teammate fall and realized that this wound was caused by a sword. He guessed that the opponent had changed weapons. He ordered his teammates to throw some glowing powder around the artifact because Li Han might be somewhere around here. His teammate quickly threw that handful of powder into the air. Li Han immediately avoided them, but the tip of the hook accidentally touched the powder. He could see his cheeks were covered in glowing powder. Li Han was angry. He didn't want to give up destroying the artifact. Suddenly he realized something. One of them noticed Li Han's trick, so he shouted to announce it. The stranger with two curls of hair reassured his accomplices to stay calm to cope. He thought that if he followed the scent, before he could finish his sentence, he would realize something. That guy was angry when he realized that the smell of rice had been mixed. He got angry and reminded his teammates not to be distracted by Li Han. He was definitely still nearby. Suddenly his teammates were attacked from behind. They fell to the ground, leaving the stranger alone. He complimented Li Han for being so decisive, but he was not happy at all but extremely angry. Li Han's footsteps gently landed on the ground. The stranger was upset that they were being cornered, yet Li Han chose to hide among the wounded. He pulled down the cloth covering his face. He felt interesting that it had been a long time since he had met someone like Li Han. He bent down to pick up his teammate's sword from the ground. Then introduced himself as Gao Ra Se. Ga Rase radiated murderous aura. He informed Li Han that he would seriously play with him from now on. Ga Rase said that Li Han should not think that if he hid his scent with ridiculous spells, he would not notice. He immediately attacked Li Han. This surprised him because he didn't think Ga Rase could recognize him. Ga Rase was victorious because he could clearly hear Li Han's trembling breathing, so even if he was invisible, it was useless. Not stopping there, he swung his sword and was about to rush towards Li Han. He reminded him not to think that only the smell of blood would expose him, but thanks to his stupidity in reducing the number of people, he could clearly hear his voice, "You more." Ga Rase wants to end this right now. Suddenly, an illusion of swords appeared from nowhere. More and more swords gathered in a circle around Ga Rase. He then directed them towards Li Han. He quickly jumped back to avoid them. His feet stopped. In front of him suddenly something rushed hard and hit the ground. Li Han panicked because if he was one step slower, he would be in big trouble. At this time, Ga Rase was still trying to attack Li Han. He secretly thought that his swordsmanship level was far beyond his own. He couldn't believe that for an opponent who couldn't see him, all he could do was block the attack. Ga Rase approached Li Han and firmly raised her sword. His sword showed many red lines as if it was gaining strength. Li Han had difficulty blocking this attack from Ga Rase. He winced at this terrible power from the sword. Li Han was weaker, so he fell backwards hard. His face turned pale because he was in real danger right now. His hand holding the sword was still shaking from blocking the attack earlier. Li Han realized that Ga Rase was now in the aura state that Einrogard had mentioned. Ga Rase approached Li Han thanks to his frightened breathing. He pointed the sharp blade at his neck, making him jump. Ga Rase was curious about what Li Han's scared face looked like right now. Li Han was determined not to let himself die like this. He remembered the moment he fought with Ga Rase earlier. He remembered hearing that trained swordsmen could transfer mana into their swords. That was what Einrogard said to Li Han in the past. Thinking about it, he stood up with the sword, telling himself that he was a magic practitioner. Suddenly, there was a burning blue fire, making Ga Rase a bit surprised. Li Han swung his sword vigorously. But Ga Rase quickly blocked his attack. He was so angry that he couldn't believe that at this moment, Li Han could still attack him. Li Han was secretly happy because this move worked. He knelt on the ground and was in a position to attack Ga Rase, thinking to himself that he had more mana than he could use anyway. Then Li Han smiled and told himself to just pour it all into the sword. Garox was sent flying far away, his whole body hitting the ground hard and sliding painfully. His mouth immediately spit out a mouthful of ketchup, his white eyes gradually lost consciousness, and he lay down in pain. Unable to help but be shocked by the power, Garox, whose mouth was still covered in blood, opened his mouth in doubt. The sword had just touched and he was about to snap. He looked at him, his whole body was emitting a green light. He was still bewildered, he didn't think it was him who did it. Just as he was about to lie on the ground, he stood up, holding himself up with both elbows. He couldn't fall here. Before his eyes, he was still motionless, his whole body stiff. He looked at him with the intention that he should die right now. Breathing heavily, Li Han had difficulty breathing. There was sweat pouring down all over my face, and I couldn't understand why my body couldn't move. He looked at his calloused, trembling hands. Was it because he had tried to impart mana? Glancing at Garox, he had stood up with his sword to support him. He looked at him helplessly. Garox rushed forward, his steps quickly rising from the ground. He now raised the knife to the back of his head, his whole body screaming loudly from above, "Die!" He had no time to react, he could only watch him act casually. He rushed over, his face looking a bit tired as he looked at him. Li Han himself was trembling, he held his chest in pain, his red face looked at him angrily. As soon as he got close, his mouth spat out a mouthful of red ketchup, his face gradually turning red. He shielded himself with both hands, and his body fell to his feet, collapsing unconscious. A moment later, he recovered, slowly looked at him, holding his sword and slowly approaching him. Garox, who was strong just now, was now lying still, with ketchup flowing out of his mouth, turning a patch of grass red. Li Han breathed evenly, unable to help but be surprised by the person lying in front of him. Faced with a mischievous person, he had some doubts. His mana-mixing attack was successful, he paid his respects. Immediately letting go of the danger, he breathed a sigh of relief and lay down. He was alive. However, he immediately looked the other way, his face pale and difficult, but before that, the professor was there. In the distance, Garcia Kim rushed forward. She called his name loudly, reaching out her hand in panic. He looked at her in surprise, thinking how she could escape when she was surrounded, while she worriedly asked if he was okay. The professor with a worried face kept asking him questions, eagerly examining him. But when he looked behind him, the bodies of the besiegers were all lying around, all had lost the ability to fight, and even had their heads severed from their necks. Garcia Kim worriedly reached out to check his wound. He lay there smiling, feeling like he was worrying in vain. He cried and lay still while she treated him. Garcia smiled and looked at him with tolerant eyes. She closed her eyes to comfort him. He didn't need to worry anymore. In the distance, a small green figure is about to rush in. The most reliable reinforcement army is about to arrive. From afar, a skull surrounded by green gas rushed forward, its mouth wide open. The skull was Principal Asugone Adults. He didn't laugh when he saw it. He didn't expect that one day he would feel happy when he saw that skull. When he finished thinking, he kept closing his eyes, slowly relaxing, tiredly resting. Li Han slept on Garcia's lap, letting her stroke his hair and pat his head. Now he can rest. The cleanup team quickly cleaned up the scene, and horse carts carrying heavily piled bodies took turns working. A quiet voice rang out, apologizing to Professor Kim. The principal hovered in the air, feeling guilty. He had put her in danger. He should have predicted this. Garcia sat on the carriage, resting in the distance, rubbing his hands and smiling. It's okay, Principal. Who would have thought that the Dusk and Dawn team would appear? This statement touched the principal, Professor Kim, his eyes filled with tears of emotion. Suddenly a voice, not at all good, rang out, attracting the two people's attention. Vodali next to him closed his eyes and protested. As the academy's principal, you should consider all possibilities. He immediately snorted and remained silent. Garcia sat far away and covered his mouth in surprise. Then he looked over and asked who was behind the teacher, looking at his legs being put on the handle. Garax, he replied coldly. He is a person who holds a high position in the Dawn team, and is extremely skilled in combat, nicknamed the Assassin Mage, according to the information he knows. The principal was angry, and as soon as he saw that he was still breathing, he wanted to send him off for a while. The principal glanced down, angrily said anyway. Before his eyes was the scene, surrounded by thick green bridges, scattered haphazardly. Seeing the spheres, Asugone immediately realized that this was not the fighting style of a mercenary. He calmly approached and observed this thing. Asugone was surprised when he thought about the boy lying in the treatment compartment and was suspicious. He was still lying unconscious. The principal couldn't help but be surprised at what his family had raised. Garcia panicked. Thanks to his response, everything was resolved. The principal looked at her with eyes open and closed. Not only that, hearing this sentence made her startled and bewildered. Asugone felt suspicious that a rookie could use magic in combat, so he concluded that he was very skilled in attack magic. Looking at the mercenaries, he could see that they weren't just using magic against the two of them. His image appeared in battle, his whole body covered in green gas, skillfully using magic and combat weapons. This kid is interesting. The principal's voice made her unexpected. She looked at him helplessly. After saying that, he licked his lips with pleasure, showing that he considered him a fish on the chopping block. I want him, he shouted, his hand made of transparent gas still rubbing his chin. This is a direct disciple. The teaching method especially focuses on passing on everything to a single person. Asugone pouted, wanting to correct him using traditional methods but was immediately rejected by Garcia. If he did so, His Majesty would not leave it alone. He immediately rubbed his forehead with a headache. There was no other way. After all, he was the one who made the rules. Still not giving up, he would wait when it was his turn. He lay on the car as if his body could hear it, moaning without protesting. That night, he saw a nightmare. Asugone emitted blue smoke from his mouth, slowly emitting. From there, 4 identical skeletons appeared. Clean up the area, and pay appropriate compensation to the mercenaries and skeletons who obeyed the order. He looked around, observing carefully. Don't forget to bring this ancient relic back with you. Look towards a round lump with a strange seal in the middle. Glancing over, Asugone noticed Professor Valadi doing something with the beaten guys lying on the ground. He approached and immediately asked what he was doing. Professor Valadi. The professor turned to pay attention. He quickly said he was investigating the strange postures. This also caught Asugone's attention. It was indeed very strange. He quickly assumed it was Li Han's doing, his eyes sure. Looking at the poses, he became even more worried about the strange magic, thinking that Li Han had reached a new level, a level that even he did not know about. But very quickly his rough arms turned blue and he was sweating profusely, that is. Garcia quickly covered his face and shyly said it was because he punched them. The sky was almost dark, at the academy where Li Han studied. He was lying on the bed, seemingly having no intention of waking up yet. After a long, good sleep, he felt extremely comfortable. He wasn't sure if the situation was okay, but it was all in his head. Gradually opening his eyes, he looked to the side, carefully looking at where this is. Asugona's huge face caught his eyes staring and asking, "Are you awake?" Li Han sat up startled, not understanding why the principal was here, and couldn't say anything. He could only keep silent in his head. He looked sideways, careful because it was in a strange place. Garcia noticed his worry and immediately comforted him, saying it's okay, Li Han. She calmly explained and praised him. He must have been very shocked by the ambush. This made her feel that he had done very well. Hearing what I needed to know, he immediately understood the problem. Realizing in his memory that after he fainted, Asugona came to comfort him and closed his eyes. He looked a little angry and said, "You did very well, but you were sweating, yes." Garcia happily complimented him, but thought that maybe everything would go easily because he helped the principal a lot, so. Very quickly, he threw water, thinking that he should still be punished for trying to escape from school. He was silently crying on the side, so angry, you know. Li Han hugged his face in despair, thinking that if it wasn't for them, maybe he would have been. Garcia next to him consoled him, "Sorry, Li Han, because you tried to help me." Asugona approached and wondered if a first-year student could get through the underground warehouse, and this question caught his attention. He immediately mentioned that he had picked up the keys scattered around. He laughed, knowing right away that it was a trap. Seriously speaking, it couldn't keep up with the warehouse guards. Their eyes became even sharper. Li Han crossed his arms and looked away, saying he didn't know what the teacher was talking about, but Asugona above immediately exposed him for pretending to be stupid. "I see, well, how sad." Of course, he seriously reminded him that he would not use that path again. Li Han held his hands and cried. Asugona looked out the window. His eyes seemed to want to say something. It was almost dark outside. He thought for a long time. He quickly told him, "Listen carefully, Li Han of Wodanas." These words directly caught his attention. His eyes sharpened. Then he turned back and told him that he sincerely thanked the team for their courage against the dusk and dawn, to protect everyone as well as the professor. He stroked his chin and sincerely thanked him, his eyes clearly expressing his intention. To show his heart, he turned his palm towards him, the gentle light radiating from his hand. From his hand appeared a sword. He told him he would give him the famous sword some morning. He carefully placed the sword in both hands, neatly radiating majesty. He was silent for a moment, thankful, but noticed something when he looked closely. His eyes lit up, as if he detected something wrong. Li Han realized that this was their sword, and more importantly, the teacher was willing to give it to him. Asugona was on his cool side, using a finger to tell him to be quiet. Also, he held out his hand to show you. A talisman-like envelope appeared before his eyes. "Please accept this item." On the leather amulet, the three words "right" appear clearly. When he received it, he immediately let out an emotional cry, carefully holding it with both hands. His eyes darkened, realizing that this was the talisman's right to go out, and he shouted in panic. His eyes appeared. In his mind was the image of himself when he received the right to go out before his friends. "And as soon as you meet the card is like a passport. Stay away, I have the right to go out there." And as soon as he went outside, the sight of the air delighted him. His eyes lit up, a ray of light flashed with joy and hope. He knelt down and bowed his head sincerely, thanking the professor. He pledged to be loyal to him for life. He stood next to him and was sweating. "Okay." Then he immediately asked about his health, but Li Han happily hugged the amulet, saying he's fine now. As if realizing his time had come, he happily wanted him to go and be punished. He heard it, his eyes seemed to be incredulous, and he remained silent without saying a word. Asugona held his head, feeling sorry for himself, and said he didn't want that either. Li Han looked on in frustration, Garcia next to him silently helpless and speechless. But he quickly said that he was not punished for trying to escape. This sentence made him suspicious and asked again, "Why?" "Because I was caught while doing so." His eyes tightened, his hands made a circle shape around his eyes. So you said at that time I should sit still and pretend to be blind. He immediately cursed in his heart, even though Garcia next to him tried to stop him. Asugona looked outside the window, his eyes filled with caution. It's already morning, this time tomorrow, he observes and decides. The scene changed to images, old rooms with locks as hard as prisons, in them. Thinking of another way to escape, Li-Han changed his clothes and stood in front of the cell door. He carefully held the doorknob. He was really locked up, he was so strange. But very quickly his attention switched to something else. He didn't understand that this was a punishment room. It was no different from a dormitory. He looked over at the fully furnished room. Li-Han sat down on the bed satisfied, his whole body relaxed. Not bad, better than when he graduated. A skeleton approached, the sound echoing throughout the hallway. He directly called his name, which made him startled on the bed and looked towards the door. The bony hands brought a basket of cakes and told Li-Han to accept it. Li-Han's face darkened in surprise, he himself was bewildered. The cake basket is carefully wrapped, full of colorful, sparkling fruit and cakes. He raised his hand to cover the light radiating from it. What is this? He doesn't understand why the food is so good. Very quickly, the skeleton soldier placed the basket of bread firmly on the ground and said, "Dream." He was startled when he heard it. This was a gift from Professor Garcia. She wanted to apologize to student Li-Han. He immediately felt shy when he realized it. Aha told her he thanked her. Many other things flew in from outside, making him unable to react in time. No. The last apple flew over his head. Li-Han's whole body was now filled with 2 pieces of bread. He sat helplessly on the ground. Li-Han comfortably took a sip of tea, slowly. On the table was a plate of fruit cake. He comfortably enjoyed it. The air gradually lifted. He thought about the battle of trying his best to fight the enemy. His whole body was tired, and he felt lucky to have returned alive. He hadn't yet taken a combat class, but when it came to actual combat he was able to control it. Thinking about it made Li-Han feel discouraged. In addition, he carefully rotated the ball into the air, gracefully and expertly controlling it. Li-Han himself did not expect that he had successfully controlled a perfect magic circle. His face turned pale. Unintentionally he proved Validi's saying that adversity makes people more mature. While thinking as he collapsed, he thought that if he repeated it, he would definitely fail. Tears welled up in his eyes. Li-Han told himself that he would not use his mana carelessly next time. Luck would not come many times. The more he thought about it, the more he didn't want himself to appear in the newspaper with the image of a stupid, humiliating first-year student. Silently abandoning that thought, Li-Han leaned back in his chair, feeling that he was selfish enough. Just when he didn't know what to do right now, his eyes turned to another direction. He looked at the book on the table. The title in the air had successfully attracted attention. From the book radiates a sentimental, dangerous and unapproachable atmosphere. He felt worse than being locked up in the punishment room. Asugona gave him a book, took it. Holding the book was a bit doubtful, seeing that he immediately said it would help you have less free time. Remember to read it. He frowned warily, his eyes shifted. This is a stick or a carrot, like the snake and apple in mythology. The devil appeared. He told him it was a gift from the principal. He was human, he would also feel guilty. The angel on the other side appeared and gave an indistinct sign, so the teacher would never see any sin. Furthermore, the more he thought about it, he felt that his teacher was not a human being, but an immortal creature. The thought of wanting to read was quickly pushed aside. Li-Han frowned and thought he shouldn't read. But the book automatically popped out, the pages flipped back and forth. This startled Li-Han, his hand raised in the air. The page stopped. This made him more suspicious. The book opened by itself. From the stopped page, the words flew up from the paper, following a magical force, row by row, upward. The letters formed a chain, rushing straight towards him, leaving him unable to dodge. The words touched him, passing through his body as he closed his eyes to receive them. And then he felt knowledge flowing into his head. Li-Han didn't know what it was. Li-Han frowned and had a headache, not understanding what Asugona wanted to teach him. In front of him, the letters formed a chain, and the teacher's figure appeared huge. He looked at the teacher and the principal in surprise. The words surrounding them were like chains surrounding both of them, but inside he was startled and called out to the teacher. He was surprised and told him to speak. This surprised him and made him unable to think. Why? Tell me the name of the magic you're thinking of, and he'll explain more clearly. Under his feet it crumbled. Li-Han held his head. What? He didn't know magic. He had never heard or learned about it. However, words suddenly appeared in his mind, leaving him unable to define them. In front of Asugona, he spoke loudly, striding heroically like Gonadaltus. He let out a satisfied laugh. Lihan had returned to the room, covered in blue light. In his mind, Asugona's words remained, exactly what an idiot. The chair could not withstand the force and fell backwards. The book closed silently on the table. He sat down on the ground, his body seemed to have lost all strength. Lihan raised his face to the sky and breathed a sigh of relief. He still couldn't figure it out, didn't understand what had just happened, wondered if the teacher had just cast a spell on the book. But he lay down on the ground, sighing tiredly, his body relaxing comfortably. Lihan couldn't guess anything, but the knowledge of Gonadaltus's heroic stride magic was flooding his mind, making him a bit relieved. He didn't think he would use it, but still surprised that magic was taught like that. Lihan reached for the fruit basket. Lihan chewed and thought as if predicting from a skull. He guessed there would be no special reason, but he didn't know that Asugona wanted to teach him directly but was rejected by another teacher. He could only regret it. Lihan opened his eyes wide and looked up. He felt a sound and sat up to observe. Lihan looked sideways, feeling like he was imagining things. The sound of banging sounded again on the other side of the wall, attracting his attention. He approached the wall, thinking someone had knocked on the wall, but inexplicably, he didn't think there was someone in the next room. Lihan silently observed for a while, his eyes sharp and waiting. The person on the other side had an unknown face and kept knocking on the wall to attract attention. Feeling that the person was close enough, he called over and asked what block Lihan was in. This surprised him. When he got straight to the point, he immediately said he was a first year. The person on the other side happily said he was hardworking. Then he called himself Gold, which caught his attention. Because as far as Lihan knows, Gold is the nickname for fourth years. After confirming, he felt that the other party was an older person and immediately greeted him more respectfully. But the next second he realized why there was a fourth year here. He was a first year, so he was forbidden to go out. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this rule did not apply to fourth years. He quickly thought that he had no right to speak to anyone, because he was the one caught while robbing, then rubbed his head and thought again. The person on the other side asked why he came here. Lihan carefully raised his chair and said he was caught sneaking out. Gold laughed happily at the mischievous recruits, while he asked why he was here. The other party heard the word senior and immediately became serious, telling him to go ahead. After all, after graduating, they were all magicians. Lihan immediately spoke directly and was not polite, immediately asking why he was here, which startled him completely. Gold was a bit disappointed, thinking that he really called him natural, not knowing what kind of person he was, so he said he came in because he had failed. During a test, this statement made Lihan a bit surprised. Huh? Lihan asked again excitedly, failing the test means being arrested, isn't that a bit too much? But the person on the other side immediately moved his chair closer, thinking that there was no need to be surprised because it was something that happened often. He sat down, slowly saying the reason. There were the necessary ingredients for the magic test, but he hadn't prepared them in time. So he decided to sneak into the medicine warehouse and steal the reagents. The senior helplessly described what he did. And caught in the trap, this key sentence made him understand that he was arrested for stealing things. He lamented that he should not pay attention to details, that if he wanted to live at the academy, he should throw his brain away, a truth he realized after studying here for so long. But he quickly became serious. He thought for a moment. He looked towards the door. He himself didn't want to come in here again. He whispered through the door, telling him the underground passage was probably difficult to use now. Did he know of any other way? He covered his mouth and glanced, hoping to gather useful information. The senior on the other side thought for a moment, tapping his hand with his finger in consideration. He crossed his legs and thought, then said that you asked too many questions. Why did he have to tell you? Lihan on the other side sighed and smiled. Understood, you knew he wanted to play, right? Lihan stood up and shouted loudly to the guard, but the senior on the other side heard it and was startled and worried. He looked around in panic, not understanding what he wanted to do. The guard held a large bundle and walked through the hallway. Suddenly there was a loud noise from the front door, causing him to panic. No. The door opened, light shone in, and the senior panicked that at this rate, his detention would last longer. The next second, in the senior's hand was a mountain of candy, making the senior unable to understand, with only surprise in his eyes. The senior was still bewildered, holding the candy in his hand and sitting still. This is the food from the next room, eat it. His mind was confused, not understanding what was going on. There was a noise on the other side that caught his attention. His hand holding a cup of tea was confusing. He asked him in surprise, not understanding why there could be good things in the detention room. He happily replied that it was a gift. The senior glanced at him, wondering why he still ate well in the detention room. The only thing about his image is that he is great influence, sitting high up looking down at him. Thinking about it for a moment, he immediately seemed to want to accept. Okay, I'll tell you, hearing this sentence makes you happy again. It's truly the power of gifts. When he stood up, the senior continued to speak, but he had to make it clear first. This is something he heard about above but hasn't verified, he said. He sat down on the chair, realizing that the information was uncertain, but he will make a decision when he hears it all. He can't help but knit his hands together to concentrate, because this is a situation that does not allow him to choose. The next day, Li Han and Yanera went for a walk in the forest. She followed to listen to the lecture from the previous day. Her face was a bit embarrassed, but he was extremely focused on the notebook. She found Li Han really scary. Even though he went through a big incident, he still did his homework. Always scary, he still seriously studied today's weather. After walking a while, Li Han stopped. The two of you are currently standing in front of the cage. It seems we are here again today. He remembered what his senior said. Had he ever been to the bell tower on top of the school? Everyone said that a special caged area that not many people knew was there. The scene appeared on a row of giant houses. It is a captive area for non-animals. Professors often fly them around, or a place where staff let the eagles rest while delivering letters from the royal family. Or the blessed beasts, freely entering and exiting the academy. The image of birds jumping through the barrier. He looked around, feeling that what he said was true. When Li Han came, he couldn't ride the animals easily. He thought to himself, after all, this was such a place. As soon as he placed his hand on the wooden door of the area, it was not without a chance. The door opened, light shining into the bright area. He looked at it brightly, feeling that as long as there was a non-zero chance, it was still worth a try. But as soon as Li Han strode in, the people around looked and panicked. One of them, recognizing him as a member of the Wardanas family, the other person whose head was loved by a horse, was also surprised to hear. Not only were the people panicking and not understanding why he came, but even the horses had a grudge against him. He glanced at someone but he quickly looked away. Li Han spoke up saying they should stop the habit of judging others by their family. Yanera next to him also had no opinion. But she only sympathized. They reacted like that because of rumors about him. Suddenly a pair of hands reached out and called him back. Hey! It's Radford. Li Han is surprised that he's here. But he bowed again and said good morning to Mr. Wardanas, which startled Li Han. He bent down frantically, asking him to talk like before. But Radford thought that he could not be rude to Li Han, and felt comfortable talking like this. This statement made the people around him whisper more. Li Han trembled. He was sure this time he misunderstood more. Yanera next to him could also clearly see his painful expression. You give Radford permission to speak without bowing, and besides, he has something to say, right? Radford immediately said yes, Mr. Wardanas. Radford immediately recounted how when he escaped, he observed everything while hiding behind wooden crates. Not long after, the principal and professors came to the rescue. At that time, he took the opportunity to search the trunks on the cart when the merchant was not paying attention. Radford did it in a way that no one noticed. After that, he immediately took out a small chest and placed it in front of Li Han. The chest inside was filled with medicine. I found things that seemed useful. The tone was somewhat cheerful. Yoner and he thought to themselves that because we had to hide it in our clothes, I could only take small things. These bottles of medicinal herbs looked very expensive. I really couldn't believe that I could get them all in that situation. The two of them looked quite surprised at the person in front of them. He immediately patted his shoulder and praised Radford for thousands of likes. He was so awesome. He was truly the king of thieves. Radford stood there for 5 seconds, as if dumbfounded, not knowing if he was praising or criticizing, but also said thank you. He and Yoner sat down on a nearby chair and carefully looked at each bottle of medicinal herbs. Confused, he asked what kind of medicinal bottles these were. She sat next to her thinking this smelled of alcohol. Could it be alcohol? Hearing the word alcohol, he immediately shouted something alcohol. He startled her and laughed. There's more alcohol than alcohol, don't worry. To understand all this, we need to do more research, he lamented. Thank you, Radford. You stood up, took the box and left. He bowed his head to greet you. It was my honor to give it to you. You sounded a bit panicked and told Radford not to say that. The silhouette of someone's footsteps ran towards the three of them. Nelia beamed and ran to everyone. We're here. But her response was your inattention. Oh yes, do you want to take care of the horse with me? This attractive offer is a great honor to Radford, while Nelia stood there looking on sadly. It seems that the scene that appeared in Nelia's mind was more terrible than in reality. Li-Han smiled brightly. He helped a lot. Yoner said that Radford was more talented than Nelia, which made Radford shy. I'm his only friend, the most you two need. Oh, what she just thought about was so scary. Suddenly he felt like someone was looking at him. He suddenly didn't understand why Nelia was slumped on the ground. He called out to Nelia, when did she come, while she seemed frozen in place. It seems you have found a new friend. If so, perhaps. She slowly stood up, her knees shaking slightly. As soon as she finished speaking, she flew away. You don't need me anymore. Just like that, he looked at her in bewilderment. He shouted loudly at Nelia, and Yoner didn't understand what she was saying. Nelia scratched her head and smiled brightly as if I had misunderstood. After saying that, she was also sad. Yoner comforted her. Of course there was no way that could happen. Radford also spoke up to clarify, stating that he was not a friend but a subordinate. To break up this sad atmosphere, Li-Han immediately spoke up and said we should take care of the horses now. A white horse with a beautiful pale yellow mane made him look at it for a long time. Its whole body was beautiful. Its gentle eyes made Li-Han think it seemed obedient. Maybe it was just acting obedient and he objected to his previous thoughts. No matter how quiet the scene on his side was, on the contrary, Yoner and Radford's side had horses biting their ears and spitting on them. Thanks to that, he could also make an observation about the attitudes of the remaining horses. This one is probably the same. The horse appeared arrogant and beautiful. Suddenly the horse was startled and slightly panicked. It slightly launched itself forward and away from his hand. His eyes widened, staring at something. He immediately smiled, knowing it wouldn't be easy, so I prepared this in advance. He took out a brush and it seemed like it was also one of his special moves. That's right, good boy. He groomed that shiny mane, making the horse's three-pointed eyes widen in confusion. Maybe that doesn't make it happy, but on the contrary, it makes it even more angry. Nelia looked over and saw the horse's fierce fire as if it wanted to swallow him whole. Oh, it turned out the other side was fighting a battle. Burning anger appeared on both people and horses. Nelia is also quite three-pointed. She is also struggling here with the horse that is chewing her hair. The light was still shining brightly on the ceiling of the stable. He was so tired that he collapsed and sat on the ground. In the end, both men and horses collapsed and lay on the ground. Li-Han took the opportunity to continue combing its mane. It seemed completely exhausted. The horse was bored and sweating profusely and lay still, letting his face do whatever he wanted. He didn't expect that combing its mane would be so difficult. That horse still seemed resigned to Li-Han's stubbornness. He was also drenched in sweat and depressed, thinking that the others were the same. Over here, the other three were also struggling with the horses, and then Yoner sighed, and Nelia and Radford talked about my horse being extremely obedient. I think I'm also closer to my own child. He continued to groom it. It glared at him sharply. Macon spoke next to him and made him so bored that he wanted to talk. The horse resignedly turned his face away. I'm not done yet. That's strange. He should have opened up. Yeah, I've never seen a horse like that. Both of them were talking about it. In contrast to here, Li-Han sometimes wants to cry. It's a beast. If you think about the scary temple of professors, and their barbaric behavior in the name of achieving educational achievements, sex, this case is very possible. Could it be that it is a monster? If you think about the scary temple of professors, and their barbaric behavior in the name of bringing achievements to education. Suddenly the horse's appearance looked pitiful. His eyes were so pitiful. He was always wary of Li-Han. He was discouraged, shaking his head at his thoughts just now. No, that was a bit too much. A small house with a pretty cute light red tile roof located among the trees. A fire flickered in the room where two people were sitting and talking. Uregilm and the other professor were sitting and talking to each other. The students seemed to be working very hard in the stables. The teacher raised her glass to drink even though I only chose the hot-tempered horses, but they would open their hearts if they saw the effort of the new students. The teacher smiled sinisterly again, but if they hit the horses, it wouldn't be easy to live. That professor still kept talking. Put down the cup. Teacher, is Wardanas okay? He's hard-working, he'll be fine, is that so? The teacher across the table served more tea for the other teacher, even though a griffin was a bit difficult to handle. With hard work, intelligence and luck it would soon be tamed. This statement made the teacher surprised and stunned. The pouring water had spilled out and I still didn't know it. The teacher yelled so loudly. Why did he lose his concentration? She swung the glass of water and poured it all out. As soon as she said griffin, the teacher asked again. The teacher quickly covered her mouth, knowing she accidentally said something she shouldn't have said. There's no way, you heard wrong, the teacher denied it. The teacher banged on the table and said the truth, really. Turning a griffin into a star horse, it turns out that hidden inside that horse is the soul of a fierce eagle. In Griffin, there is a monster with the head and wings of an eagle, and the body of a lion. Because they are stubborn and picky, not just anyone can become their master. Although there are slight differences between the habits and habitats of each region, they all share one common characteristic. But the person with the lion's body did not agree with that, because he thought that they would not be suitable for a newly tamed person and blamed her for losing her memory. He kept cursing and trying to explain to her that his disciple was injured, so he had to take a day off and why she made him do those crazy things. Being scolded like that, who wouldn't be upset, but she decided to retort that how dare he scold the elder, and received the answer that because of the rules that need to be followed, how can a griffin turn into a horse? The two of them kept arguing back and forth, but no one was willing to lose. She thought that if his strength was limited by him, it would look safe, but he absolutely refused to accept that idea because she thought all eagles were as stupid as him. Slimes, huh? At the stable, Li Han was still with his other friends leading the horse along with him. He gently patted the horse because it finally obeyed. He also asked if it was true that the horse also did not like meaningless battles, and the horse's heavy and meaningless footsteps continued to walk. I don't understand why he suddenly broke up, making the horse next to him also visibly upset. Placing his hand on its flesh, he thought to himself because he found it strange that the horse was still fine after having to wear these things and concluded by thinking that maybe it was mixed blood. Looking at the belt on his stomach, Li Han thought the bracelet's mana was low. He thought more because he had to find a way to absorb more. In the middle of walking, he heard the sound of someone stopping behind. Because he was tired from the long journey, the horse stopped and he guessed that he needed to rest a bit. At first, the horse also had the intention in mind that he would tear Li Han to pieces, but now they communicate more closely with each other. He held out his hand and gave the horse 3 sugar cubes and told him to eat. The white horse did not want to admit that it was gradually listening to the boy. In the white horse's head, he thought that the 3 sugar cubes would be given to the griffin with the compliment that the sugar cubes were so sweet because that food had never appeared in the wild. But the mind still struggles because it cannot do so. The ancient wild blood is reminding him of his dignity, so he cannot fall so easily. Over here, he still thought to himself even though he was closer to it. He wondered, but how to increase the mana absorption rate? The white horse on this side still bared its teeth and grumbled. Seeing that, he asked if he was tired. In the morning, in the class on understanding real alchemy, a group of 4 friends stood together because they were not allowed to listen to lectures outside today. Because this place is located in the Tweejok building, separate from the main building. 2 of the group's representatives poked their heads in to take a look out of curiosity. Seeing the warm and comfortable space inside, I felt a little uneasy. The blue-haired guy, he suggested reminding his friend not to be fooled because the teacher might have hidden a monster in the classroom. The red-haired leader of the group suggested splitting up because each person needed to be in case a monster appeared, and a brown-haired guy suggested to his friend that he would protect her. Li Han on this side looks like he's at the end of his rope. A new friend came out from behind and said not to worry. A Shandao card, standing between Yoner and Nelia, she covered her face with her hands and said, because we won't lose to them. Li Han raised his hand to signal to stop. While chatting, Professor Eurigilm walked in and interrupted the conversation, telling his students to take their seats. They immediately obeyed and responded properly. The blue-haired male student, feeling a bit strange, asked the teacher if we weren't studying outdoors today. Because the last time the teacher told him to collect the ingredients, he was annoyed and asked if he was going to make the medicine outside too. Knowing what the students were thinking, he gently reassured them, but don't worry because it won't be like outdoor lessons. And proudly say that classes will be very safe. Having been deceived many times, this time in the eyes of the students, Professor Eurigilm was only lying. At the beginning of class, he took out a jar and wanted students to directly pour water into the cauldron. Professor Uregulm explained that alchemy is a complex art, so there must be no redundant steps. If a person disregards basic knowledge, he will not become a great alchemist. He forced each student to open their books because they would soon learn and practice the mana recovery medicine. Seen in the book are some confusing words. Li-Han thinks this will be difficult. Professor Uregulm said, "At first glance, alchemy seems easier than other magic. Most people think that they just need to follow the written formula. But after trying it, no one will dare to do that again. Alchemy is like cooking extremely complicated dishes, all at once. It is necessary to prepare fresh ingredients from many places. Remembering the ingredients and cooking order are just the basics to get the timing right. Finally, you must know how to stir the cauldron delicately." If he couldn't manage everything, it wouldn't be strange. Professor Uregulm panicked as he looked at his students rubbing their eyes in a haze of smoke. When he heard that, he laughed because of the new students and felt it was not easy. Suddenly he stopped and felt surprised. When I saw Li-Han sitting below attentively listening to what I said just now. Having received it all, he cracked his knuckles to get to work. Started cutting onions. The hourglass next to it was still running. Pick up 2 handfuls of onions. He slowly dropped it into the pot of boiling water. Seeing such quick operations made Professor Uregulm surprised because the clock had not yet finished running and the deeds had already been completed. He was surprised and recognized how good he was. He looked like a trained alchemist. Uregulm gritted his teeth because he could not accept this existence. He sat back and smiled, giving the ideas of geniuses. Li-Han over here, you just listen to what the teacher says. He knew that must be what the teacher was thinking. Change the stirring operation faster and think that's not the case, Professor. Recalling the lessons when he was young, he had to endure a lot of scolding. He could only stand there sadly remembering. Professor Uregulm put a tablespoon in his mouth and tasted them. After eating, he felt mana filling his body, very refreshing. The professor praised Li-Han for doing a very good job. He himself didn't believe that your body contained so much mana that you couldn't receive mana recovery anymore. But no matter what he said, the teacher still did not forget to introduce to the other students that there was someone in the class who had created the perfect magic potion. Everyone was surprised to hear it because it was Li-Han Danas. Pour out endless compliments. Each person came to taste it and recognized him as a genius. But there was also someone who could make magic potions, that the whole class had almost forgotten. His friends told him that that person was Sienna. The classmate pointed at her. Sienna here is still manufacturing no less. People were talking back and forth because she belonged to the snake race. And a member of the Freeming Shrine. The friend further told Li-Han that Yoner previously explained that there is a religion that worships alchemy. Every member is a talented alchemist, so Sienna is clearly also very talented. She immediately turned to look at him. Then Sienna approached and started a conversation. At first, she hesitantly asked him if he was from the Danas family, and happy to meet him, she introduced herself as Sienna. He was also very happy to meet her and told her that she didn't need to use honorifics. Seeing her talent, he felt a bit self-conscious because he couldn't prepare magic medicine better than her. The two shook hands as friends, but when they touched him, he still felt something cold. Sienna also did not expect to meet a talented believer like him, and wondered if he had been taught by his family. Li-Han hesitated and seemed hesitant to answer. Just as he hesitated, the teacher called them both back to their seats, cutting off the conversation. Professor Uregulm added that all are the same type of magic medicine but the results are different, so there's no need to overdo it. Then firmly clench your fists because everything is just the beginning. Because there are many more complicated and strange things, and alchemy is welcoming. Li-Han stood in a corner here wondering why all the professors wanted to kill the desire to learn. He wrote on the homework board that he would bring a low-level teamwork potion next week, and he would check it himself. Don't forget to bring back the ingredients and instructions. Nelia said to Yoner. She felt strange because she thought the professor would force them to find out for themselves. Yoner pulled out the cupboard and said, "He's a professor, he still has to teach those things." Yoner bent down and pulled out the drawer to get the elixir, but she seemed a bit worried. She turned to Nelia and said that she was missing an ingredient, and that wasn't enough to make it, and so was Nelia over here. Yoner saw that and raised his hand to suggest to the professor where he could get the spirit flower herb. He frowned in surprise, but said that because of those things, you had to find them yourself. After hearing that, both Yoner and Nelia were immediately disappointed. The teacher immediately told them that the items in the drawer were basic and the primrose flowers had to be out there. Pointed out and told everyone to find it for themselves. A feeling of disappointment filled the class, because he asked if you guys still remembered the first class.